I have spent the last 5 weeks optimizing 3 separate Kestrel builds down to the individual kilowatt of power, and you're just gonna sit there and enjoy it. Settle in. This is not just a Kestrel guide. We are going over damn near every combat-related build mechanic because the Kestrel demands and rewards an incredibly high level of optimization, and I want you to understand not just what is build, but also why is build. The Kestrel Mark II. Power creep has come for the small class combat ship. Realistically, this is the lesser of 3 evils. If and when they release a large class combat ship with this magnitude of power creep, the combat meta is officially over and the game is cooked. The amount of damage a small class ship can do to the overall design and balance of the game is limited, so this was a safe bet. But that still doesn't mean it's fair. Now, treating the game as single player, this might sound like a "my steak is too juicy and my lobster too buttery" complaint, but realistically, the Kestrel is miles ahead of basically any other available small or medium class ship, boasting peerless DPS and maneuverability. A large class combat ship will still be able to fit more modules and have more options while also being more durable and dealing similar amounts of damage, so the Corvette and Cutter are not buried yet, just 1 foot in the grave. Although, only a few months ago I said that the Mandalay was not superseded by the Caspian, only for the Nomad SLV to be announced and fuel scoop rate engineering released, making the Caspian pretty definitively the only exploration ship you should ever use, at least in 4 months when the Nomad is free for credits. For the moment, there still really isn't anything that beats a good federal Corvette build in terms of doing hard-level ship-only operation missions. Mostly because, even if you're in a Kestrel, you're not outmaneuvering 10 elite ships that are all trying to focus you and only you. Especially since those ships also contain other Kestrels. A Corvette can have like a billion shield HP if you pop all the shield cell banks, and its maneuverability and high level of dakka will get the job done. This is why my federal Corvette build, the Mondor, has a technically suboptimal shield arrangement. Because who cares? It can't die. However, for bounty hunting and a Haz-Res, the Kestrel really is the best a man can get. The Kestrel is a small ship that can fit 3 large hardpoints. That invalidates the existence of the Vulture, which was defined specifically by its ability to fit more large hardpoints than any other small class ship. The boilerplate description in the wiki literally says that the Kestrel was designed to replace the Vulture, and the 2 ships are very similar in internal layout and some stats. This is pretty common practice. The Python and the Crate Mark II are basically the same ship, with 2 tweaks, and the Corsair built on that design to just be better than both of them. The Federal Assault Ship and the Imperial Clipper are also basically the same ship, but the FAS is a hull tank and the Clipper is a shield tank, and also a large class ship because FDev cannot stop screwing up the proportions. Also, the Mandalay is just an ASP Explorer with every possible aspect improved. So the Kestrel is a Vulture upgrade, what was initially called a variant ship in the early days of the early access release schedule when we were still getting live streams. The Vulture is still more survivable for its base stats, but that hardly matters because in the ancient words of Mr. Miyagi, best defense, don't be there. The Kestrel is so much faster and more maneuverable than the Vulture that the Vulture can pretty much be taken out back and shot. And then shot 14 more times, because it's the Vulture, and it has an unreasonable amount of armor for its size. One thing you would probably never know about the Kestrel unless you're researching it for a guide video is that it has the highest Supercruise overcharge speed in the game, 7,600. Compare with the Mandalay's blistering yet comparatively modest 4,200, which is still ahead of most other ships. It's really not that useful of a feature, but it is noteworthy in just how much faster it is than anything else. Now, the Kestrel isn't just a direct upgrade to the Vulture because it has 1 more large hardpoint and 2 small hardpoints while also being the most maneuverable ship in the game. It also fixes the Vulture's Achilles heel. The Kestrel can fit a Class 5 power plant when the Vulture could only fit a Class 4. It was basically your choice in the Vulture to use somewhat underpowered weapons and shields, or fry yourself alive with an overcharged power plant. The thermal properties of the Kestrel are more forgiving than the Vulture, but it does not fully solve the issue. Your entire build will still revolve around heat management, and that will also influence how you play. The thermal engineering of the Kestrel is important enough to require its own separate part of the video, which I'll get to in a moment. The life support and sensors have been sized down, which cuts unnecessary bloat weight and power consumption. For the first time, I actually recommend A-rated life support. It's so light that it doesn't really affect your speed or maneuverability to spring for the extra weight. The sensors being so light also means you can afford the weight to use long-range engineering. A typical emissions range of 11k is pretty comfy bounty hunting, and it only weighs 5 tons. I do still miss the 13k range on my Corvette, but that module weighs almost as much as this entire ship. The only trade-offs are a lower armor modifier and slightly lower shield modifier, and the fact that the locked military slot is now Class 4 instead of Class 5. But also, the Vulture's Class 2 optional slot is now Class 3, and 3 of the Class 1 slots are now Class 2. This means that the Kestrel can be equipped to be more durable than the Vulture can be equipped to be, and the larger power plant can also power stronger shield boosters. So the Vulture isn't even more survivable than the Kestrel, all things considered. The Kestrel is also the only ship that can fit plasma shock accelerators, an energy weapon variant of the shock cannon that functionally has infinite ammo, ignores all damage resistances, and does not need engineering. These things warrant an entire section of the video to themselves, but I would not call them nuanced, they're just overpowered. In short, the Kestrel is probably the best bounty hunter ship in the game by a wide margin if you have the skill to actually fly one, but also probably even if you don't. You must be asking yourself, what's the catch? And there is one. Just one, though, and it's easily ignored. The Kestrel is by far the most expensive small-class ship. It costs about 15 million before discounts, which places it on the lower end of medium ships, costing about the same as a drop ship and a little less than a Mandalay. In addition, the plasma shocks cost 5 million each, easily more than doubling the cost of the build from the get-go, and the agile boost thrusters cost 7 million. If you want to save money on the plasma shocks, buy them in a Liang Rui system. Archer is supposed to provide a 20% discount on hardpoints, but that has actually been broken for about as long as I can remember. Overall, the total cost of this build with maximum discounts is about 50 million, and the rebuy is about 2.5 million. If one of the things you enjoy about small-class ships is cheap rebuys, this ship will not provide. It's still loosely a tenth of the cost of a Federal Corvette or Imperial Cutter bounty hunter build, though. It is a bit cheaper for engineering materials. Weapon engineering is minimal compared to your average combat build, and you only have 4 shield boosters max to worry about. However, you still will be doing quite a lot of hull reinforcement engineering. Basically, this is a medium-class top-tier combat ship that just happens to have the presented aspect and maneuverability of a small-class ship. But I haven't done nearly enough complaining that this combat ship can't carry enough frozen pizzas home before they thaw, so let's look at the Kestrel from a multi-role standpoint. Pretty much the first thing that I do with every new ship is to strip it to the studs to see what it's like as an exploration ship, and the Kestrel is very middle of the pack. With a 60 light-year jump range if a Class 4 fuel scoop, and a 59 light-year range if a Class 5, the Kestrel is not great at exploration, but not terrible. I wouldn't recommend. For cargo hauling and passenger missions, the Kestrel is going to be handily outperformed by a Cobra Mark V. It's a little light in the hold, mostly due to that locked military slot. A similar story for mining as well. I suppose it's not a terrible option for core mining due to its overwhelming maneuverability, but I think you'll be snatching up maybe 48 tons of diamonds before returning to base. Core miners have never really needed anything more complex than an ASP Explorer to do what they do. AX combat? Yes. Look, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. high speed, maneuverability, and strong hull HP mixed with 3 large hardpoints and 2 small place the Kestrel at the top end of the list of potential bug squashers. Don't use plasma shocks against Thargoids. They are 99% resistant against anything that isn't classified as AX damage. My personal recommendation would be 3 Class 3 Azimuth AX multi-cannons and 2 Class 1 Gauss cannons, or you could use 3 Class 2 modified plasma chargers. It won't be as durable as most of the other picks, but once again, if you get killed by a Thargoid in this ship, it is definitely a you problem. Can't insta-gib, but them's the breaks. Go build a Caspian Explorer, Python Mark II, or Corsair if that is what you want to do. The Kestrel also has another trick or 3 up its sleeve. Plasma Shock Accelerators. A Class 3 hardpoint that fits nicely into those upper slots. These things have a damage per second of 212. For reference, a Class 4 multi-cannon that is fully engineered has a DPS of 47. Now, the actual sustained DPS of these things is only around 41, because they can empty their magazine in about 2 seconds, but have a 5-second reload time. Their distro draw and thermal load is also insane, which just about tracks. They are for short, controlled bursts when you are on target. They are also, if you can believe it, auto-loaders. They reload continually, even when firing. The auto-load is pretty slow though, so you will still fire to empty pretty regularly, and the 5-second reload is faster than waiting out the auto-load. But it's still a nice feature that I did not expect to be included. Each individual gun also keeps track of its own burst interval. If you cut a burst of fire short, it will complete the rest of the burst the next time you hold down the trigger. This can cause some unexpected behavior where you hold down the trigger and get one shot out before the brief burst interval pauses fire for a split second. This incentivizes ensuring that you complete every single burst, rather than just holding the trigger like a full auto weapon, and ultimately gives them a bit of a learning curve. They also fire plasma slugs, meaning that they consume your ship's fuel tank to fire, which means it's one of the vanishingly few weapons that you can just slap more ammo for into your optionals, giving it almost limitless staying power in a Haz-Res. In my opinion, the biggest consideration for a bounty hunting ship has always been damage potential before needing to restock, and the Kestrel basically never needs to worry about restock. As a human being, you will likely need to leave your computer to eat a meal before your guns exhaust your fuel tank. This is also a serious advantage over something like highly engineered fragment cannons, which might deal similar-ish non-absolute DPS, but will run out of ammunition criminally fast. They are a fixed hardpoint, but that's fine, because this ship will never have an issue getting good time on target. These guns are designed specifically to maximally exploit a brief window of opportunity before boosting away for evasive maneuvers while you cool down and recharge your capacitor in order to do it over again. It's a dogfighting ship. Get in, do a lot of damage, get out, repeat. As if that wasn't enough, there's one absolutely ridiculous twist. Look at the in-game tooltip and you will see that its damage type is listed as Plasma. Plasma is a type of damage invented for on-foot weapons, and as a result, ship shields and armor do not have a damage resistance statistic against it. As a result, while the damage is technically not absolute, it is functionally identical to 100% absolute. Look online and you may see the damage listed as being split 20% fizz, 20% thermal, and 60% absolute, but that's actually incorrect according to community testing. That 3-way split damage spread is what is present in normal plasma accelerators. Plasma damage ignores damage resistances from engineering and shield or hull type, giving it significantly more DPS than normal against high-rank ships. To illustrate what this actually means, take a look at my Federal Corvette build's shield statistics. As you can see, due to having a damage resistance of at least 45% to each of the 3 elements, this ship has, at worst, 10,000 shield HP. But against plasma damage, forget about these 3 numbers, this is the one that matters. 5,500. You are damaging this health bar directly when you use plasma damage, bypassing these inflated resistance spreads. And these levels of resistances are very common on high-rank NPC ships. As an additional benefit, plasma shocks will operate identically against both shield and hull HP, negating the need to switch fire groups when a shield is popped. They do only have 60 armor piercing instead of 100, which means their damage will suffer against a small number of larger ships, but only marginally. I think. I can't actually find conclusive proof for or against plasma damage being reduced by armor hardness. It's not extensively tested because all other sources of absolute damage have a high enough armor piercing value that it doesn't even come into play. So maybe the armor piercing being lower than a standard PA matters, maybe it doesn't. It doesn't really help that the stats and ship outfitting in this game are routinely incorrect. And also, EDSY and Coriolis disagree on a lot of the finer points of engineering. For instance, as of writing this, Coriolis still states that plasma shocks deal split damage. EDSY says absolute. EDSY in this case is still not strictly correct, but it is incorrect in a way that doesn't actually change function. Since Coriolis is the only one that provides damage simulations against specific armor hardnesses, I'm reluctant to believe the numbers. Plasma shocks are entirely too much gun for this ship to actually handle, but at least if you get blown up, it will be because you screwed up your heat and pip management, rather than getting outmaneuvered or outgunned. They do, however, kinda turn the ship into a monolith. One of the more flavorful things about fitting a combat ship is that you get to choose what weapons you want to take in, and this can be a very personal choice where you can play to your own strengths and preferences. But in the Kestrel, you will be using plasma shocks. Their statistical superiority overrides basically any personal preference. Due to being a projectile weapon, they are a lot easier to use on larger and slower targets. I often have the most difficulty getting shots in on Viper Mark IIIs, a ship that I'm used to casually obliterating with twin Class II gimbaled multi-cannons. Vultures, ironically, also a bit wiry. Fer-de-Lances though, pushovers. And it's kinda hilarious how perfectly suited 3 plasma shocks are for laying into Anacondas and Imperial Clippers. You can't miss. The Kestrel is a small class ship built specifically to hunt and destroy large ships, something that was intentionally built into the game to not be viable due to the mechanics of armor penetration, but we're very far past that by now. However, do keep in mind that these plasma projectiles inherit your current velocity. When using your agile boost thrusters, you will notice your target projection jolts like 30 degrees from its last resting position. You will need to anticipate that before you make the maneuver. Potentially the biggest advantage of these plasma shocks, as if that wasn't enough, is that they don't require engineering. You're going to be dealing endgame damage with a small class ship, even if you haven't climbed the engineer ladder yet. And you can throw together a functional, if fragile, Kestrel build without really doing the rounds. Of course, the Kestrel also has 2 small hardpoints. Normally, I put cyto-scramblers in the small slots of any ship that has them, but they are unnecessary here, as the plasma shocks will outperform them at their own niche of short-range shield destruction. For the most part, regardless of your power plant engineering choice, you can swap out any 2 of the weapon choices I'm about to cover, except for the railgun because they are very power hungry for Class 1 modules. Just double check it's all kosher in EDSY or Coriolis first. We do have some options for the small slots. Option number 1 is a twin gimbaled frag cannon. It took me a hot minute to warm up to this configuration, but I am now an evangelist. Grade 5 high-capacity corrosive shell on one, Grade 3 high-capacity drag munitions on the other. Corrosive shell improves the damage dealt by all sources by 20%, and reduces armor hardness by 20%. So, if plasma shocks are subject to armor hardness, a peppering of this every 5 seconds will negate that penalty in all cases. The 20% bonus damage from corrosive shell equals out to about 24 sustained DPS from your plasma shocks, which is way more than you'd normally get out of a small class hardpoint. Shoutouts to Scary Effective 3321 on the Elite Dangerous subreddit for sharing his build, which included this configuration. I would never have thought of that. Drag munitions reduce an opponent's maximum thrust to their minimum thrust coefficient. This varies by ship and is generally more effective on larger ships, like the Anaconda, which has a minimum thrust of 44%, but won't do much against a Fertile Lance, which has a minimum thrust of 86%. It also really doesn't seem to cut down much on enemy boost frequency, if it does at all. Since all we really care about is applying these debuffs, it doesn't much matter that the frag cannons are gimbaled, since even if the enemy has popped chaff, the shot spread is wide enough that it'll usually hit home. Also, frag cannons have a slower shot speed than plasma shocks, and the gimbal will be able to reach further in the direction that you desired to make up the difference, allowing you to use both at once. Both of these effects only work if the ship's shield is popped, so you shouldn't fire your frags until you've stripped the shields with your plasma shocks. The actual damage that these frag cannons are capable of doing is not negligible, and that damage is maximized by holding them back until the shield is down due to the nature of kinetic resistance. Although you shouldn't be using them specifically for their damage, I have found them useful for taking out fragile but wiry small class ships like Eagles and Sidewinders, which are more difficult to land a good volley on and can actually slip between your hardpoint convergence. If you don't like frag cannons, you can also put a Class 1 turreted multi-cannon with corrosive shell. The turreted multi-cannon will allow you to apply the corrosive shell while not really giving a damn about actually operating it or holding a good vector. You will want high-capacity engineering though, because turrets are really trigger-happy. If the enemy pops chaff, it'll do a decent enough job at applying the effect because it is spraying and praying. For optimal ammo usage, keep the turret off your active fire group until you have popped the enemy's shield. I also tested some gimbaled high-yield cannons to see if there was potential for some module sniping. Unfortunately, at the speeds that the Kestrel moves, the gimbals can't really keep up to the degree of accuracy required, not to mention being functionally worthless in the face of chaff. I have never been able to snipe a power plant faster than I could simply kill the enemy with my plasma shocks. Well, what about normal shock cannons? I hear from the three of you who actually remember that they exist. You may not have access to them unless you've picked up some power converters from Toshi Station. Well, it was kinda under the radar, but normal shock cannons got a stealth buff when the Kestrel was released. I guess making the plasma shocks gave them a minute to look at the regular ones. They are now fully automatic and had their ammo pool almost quadrupled. But as a tech unlock, they cannot be engineered for higher capacity, and therefore have pretty bad staying power. Compared to plasma shocks, Class 1 fixed shock cannons are twice as efficient for distro draw, and comparable for thermal load per point of damage. However, that damage is kinetic, so it's only effective against hull, and only has an armor piercing of 25, and does not bypass resistances. It does have the same shot speed though, so if you really want two more plasma shocks that are just worse, feel free to use two fixed Class 1 shock cannons alongside your plasma shocks. Due to the ammunition limit, you'll want two fire groups, one with just your plasmas for stripping shields, and then one with all your hardpoints on the same trigger for dealing hull damage. Statistically, it's a terrible idea. In practice, it's thoroughly unnecessary. Personally, I really like it. I felt obligated to test this arrangement, and well, it is definitely not more effective than using twin frag cannons. Keep in mind that when you hold down the trigger, the guns go dakka dakka real loud, and it feels like the entire universe is exploding. However, I tested this on a low emissions power plant to give myself the maximum possible thermal overhead, and I was overheating constantly. I also had to RTB for reload after only like 15 minutes, and the ammo synth for shock cannons is disgustingly expensive. One slot can be a Class 1 railgun, high-capacity feedback cascade. You may still want to be able to counter shield cell banks after all. It's hard to out DPS negating an entire shield cell, especially on larger ships. What does suck about this is that it's a fixed hit scan with a charge up time, which you will need to actively target instead of using your plasmas. They are also power hungry, which may force you to size down your shield boosters. After some personal testing, I can say that the only ships with shield cell banks big enough to make a feedback cascade rail worth it are also fat and slow enough to be able to DPS with your plasmas faster than they can cell bank their shields back. A last-minute addition I had to quickly test and then throw into the mix is Heelys. I largely forget that Heelys exist because they require you to be in a wing with other players to benefit, and I am afraid of two-way interaction with strangers. But the addition of operations means that there is now content that has global matchmaking and can throw you into a wing with 3 other players at a whim. So, Heelys are having a wild resurgence. What I'm referring to, of course, is regeneration sequence laser beams. They are effectively able to cause health regeneration to shield HP equal to your damage output if they strike a wingmate. I'm not 100% sure, but I assume this healing does not care about the target's thermal damage resistance, and is therefore capable of having a very high effective heal rate on heavily engineered shields. I've mostly been doing terminal prosecution on hard mode as a Corvette, and getting tickled by Heelys makes me virtually invulnerable. Since you will be targeting other players instead of NPCs with these things, you don't really have to worry about chaff, so you can freely use gimbaled or turreted beam lasers for ease of use. Efficient engineering will take less distro draw and thermal load. Overcharged will provide faster healing. That choice is up to you. However, using the Kestrel for healing is kinda like marching into leveling roulette as a summoner, and then using physic on the tank. You are not in the party to heal, you are here to shred. If you want to heal, use a more durable ship with more hardpoints and a fatter distributor. The one time I tried Heelys on a Kestrel, I got positively shredded. I didn't die, but I had to reboot repair twice, and even then practically everything was breaking, and we ended up dipping. I would have been so much more effective in this encounter if I shot to kill, rather than play nursemaid. As for retributor laser beams, perish the thought. NPCs cannot take heat damage to modules or hull. The only effect of generating heat on NPC ships is to prevent them from boosting. It's actually depressing how many different mechanics that NPCs simply get to ignore. Tempting to put a thermal vent beam laser or 2 in those small slots, but the thermal vent capacity of a beam laser is proportional to its own thermal load. And the thermal load of a Class 1 beam laser is basically nothing compared to a plasma shock. Also, the distro draw cuts into our weapon's capacitor recharge, and if you want to reduce the distro draw of a beam laser, you pretty much also have to reduce its thermal load. Counterintuitive. Efficient beam lasers dump less thermal load than unengineered lasers, and way less than an overcharged. I'll go into more detail on the specific numbers involved for thermal vent beam lasers when I spiral back to thermal balancing. But before getting into the thermals, I'd like to talk for a moment about the Kestrel's handling. The Kestrel has a much higher top and boost speed and costs less capacitor charge to boost than the Vulture, on top of which it can fit the Mark II Agile boost thrusters, which allow FA off boost turning to be entirely too fast for the average pilot to control. If you are a veteran pilot and are used to popping the clutch during your turns, you will need to unlearn that muscle memory very quick. The Agile boost thrusters allow for maneuvers previously impossible, even in an Eagle. My personal favorite maneuver is what I'm calling the dip and rip. Boost below your opponent and then FA off for just a fraction of a second while gently pitching upward, and you will instantly flip a 180 and catch them with their pants down. It's really finicky, and I'm still getting the hang of it, but it's nice to have a high skill ceiling. In fact, making the most of the Kestrel's nimbleness is above my pay grade. I'm more of a numbers man, but even without using flight assist off, a whole bunch of you out there are about to discover a game mechanic you never knew existed, but always has. Blackout and redout. Pitch upwards or downwards too high at too high a speed, and you will black out and stall the ship for a few seconds. This was difficult to trigger prior to the Kestrel's launch. You'd pretty much need to be in a small class ship using enhanced performance engines and a stripped down build. But the Kestrel just constantly rubs up against it all the time. Flight assist off turning negates this, and that's one of the reasons why FA off toggling is fundamental to good piloting. A positively cursed idea now occurring to a lot of pilots is adding the ability to make the flight suit upgradable for additional G resistances. That one's free, FDev. Go ahead and make it cost like 2,000 Merc coin, 50 manufacturing instructions, and 20 pharmaceutical isolators. I promise, I won't complain. The Kestrel's top speed is still lower than a stripped down Imperial Eagle, Viper Mark III, or Courier, but 600 meters a second is basically the most that you can expect anything to go and still be able to turn. The Kestrel also inherits the Vulture's 90% minimum thrust ratio, meaning that you really do not need any pips and engines to go nearly your top speed. You still will want a pip or two in engines to boost regularly though. What the Agile boost thrusters do best, however, is translation. Lateral and vertical movement while boosting is disgustingly quick. You ever just wanted a dodge button in Elite Dangerous? Well, you got it. Up, down, left, right. Pop a boost while holding any of these inputs and you will violently jolt in that direction. Doesn't fully negate your forward boost speed increase, so you may want to experiment with using your landing gear as a maneuvering brake. If you don't know what I mean by that, it's a little trick employed for racing builds and my personal favorite way to maneuver the mail slot. For a demonstration of how it works, here's how I get fat-assed ships like the Plipper and Cutter into stations most quickly. Do not do this in open. Since stations usually face the celestial body they orbit, you will practically never drop in on them facing the mail slot, and therefore you need to pull a hairpin turn. No problem in small ships like the Kestrel, but heavy class ships have way too much drift to do this at any substantial speed. That is, unless you drift at a right angle to the mail slot, flight assist off to align yourself to the entry vector, wait until just before the mail slot comes into view, and then toggle flight assist off back on and boost. Boosting dramatically increases the strength of not just your forward thrusters, but also your lateral thrusters, so especially on larger ships or ships with weak lateral thrusters like the ASP, you can boost to almost immediately halt your lateral drift. The drawback of boosting for this purpose is that the majority of your boost's velocity will be forward momentum, and especially if you're buzzing the mail slot, you may really not want that. So the solution is to boost to arrest your drift momentum and then pop your landing gear, which mutes your thrusters and limits your forward velocity. You can also use your cargo hatch, but cargo hatches can be broken or malfunction, and landing gear doesn't require power to operate. Landing gear may take some time to fully deploy and retract, but importantly, the limits it imposes on your speed are instantly applied or removed the very frame you press the deploy retract button. You cannot boost with your cargo hatch or landing gear deployed, so you must boost and then counter the boost with the deployment. If this sounds counterintuitive, it's because it is. Boost braking may or may not be an intended feature, but at this point, it's an integral part of your toolkit. Now, before we can talk about build options, we have to lay the groundwork about thermals. A lot of you actually really wanted to hear my 40-minute lecture on power plant engineering, and this is almost half of it. I double-checked my math during editing and realized that the Kestrel fires 5 volleys of 4 shots and not 5 volleys of 5 shots, so I had to re-record a lot of the numbers from my first recording, so if it's a bit spliced up, that's why. Also, apologies if a lot of this sounds like I'm longing to taste the barrel of a gun. I was very sick prior to recording the voiceover. By being a small ship with such huge weapons, the Kestrel ends up not so lightly choked by thermal load, and we need a plan around it. This is a problem inherited from the Vulture, and it has not yet been fully fixed. For reference, the Vulture's heat capacity is 237 units with a max dissipation of 35.6 units. The Kestrel's capacity is 276 with a max dissipation of 39.6 units per second. This looks pretty good on paper, but the maximum passive thermal load of an overcharged 4A power plant is about 10 units, and an overcharged 5A is 14, so using that lower power plant can passively consume the upgraded dissipation, resulting in similar performance. Heat mechanics are complicated. Really complicated. But the short form is that you don't reach maximum dissipation until you hit the thermocline of 66% heat capacity. Above 66% capacity, your ship's ability to get rid of heat plateaus, and if the forces it's being subjected to do not decrease, you will continually gain additional heat percentage, and when you get over 100%, you start to take module damage. This damage is dealt to random modules and cannot be mitigated by module reinforcement packages. Above 150%, you start to also take hull damage. We don't have the numbers on the Kestrel's minimum dissipation, so we're flying a little blind in terms of low heat management. The notable sources of heat generation are, in order of importance, weapons fire, power plant load, and engine load. Keep in mind when hearing these numbers that you want to keep your heat generation below 40 units per second. Going over that in short bursts is fine, but you must go below that for a time to return back to the 66% thermocline. The thermocline begins at 182 units of heat and you will begin taking module damage at 276, meaning that you have about 90 units of heat generated before you actually have to worry about it. The thermal load of a plasma shock accelerator, which you will have 3 of, is 1.7 units per shot. They fire in bursts of 4 shots, which means that for one burst of all 3 guns, the total thermal load is 20.4 units. Hold down the trigger and you get a sustained fire of 15 rounds per second for about 5 bursts before you need to reload. Total thermal load for firing yourself dry is 102 units. Toasty, but it's followed by a mandatory 5-second reload time. Ergo, when you figure out the thermals for your build, a good target is to have at least 25 units per second of dissipation spare, as that will eat through the thermal load of the volley during the reload. The maximum total fire rate of a shock cannon while factoring in reload is actually just shy of 3 rounds per second. With all 3 cannons, that's a total thermal load of 15.3 units per second, which fits comfortably into just about any build we can make, but has peaks and valleys. That's just the sticker value, however. The thermal load of weapons fire is multiplied the closer you are to an empty capacitor. I don't know what the multiplier curve is exactly, but I have read that the thermal load at completely dry is a 5 times multiplier. Ergo, the lion's share of your heat management can come from simply not firing your plasmas with less than 50% in your weapons capacitor. And, notably, weapons and ships don't overheat independently. You have one heat measure. If a weapon says it's overheated, what it actually means is that there's insufficient power in the capacitor to fire it. Now, the distro draw of a plasma shock at full tilt, never letting go of the trigger, is overall 2.76 megawatts, times by 3 cannons, and your total draw is 8.28. Again, this draw has peaks and valleys as the gun discharges and then reloads. Unfortunately, the maximum achievable weapons capacitor recharge is 6.48 megawatts, so you will never be able to achieve the full DPS of these guns. With 3 pips into weapons, you will get just shy of 5 megawatts of weapons recharge speed, about 60% potential DPS. Briefly going above the draw that your distro can provide depletes the capacitor, and that means increased thermal load. The more of a deficit you run, the worse it gets, and that may make weapons-focused distros tempting. But weapons-focused distros have worse recharge rate, giving you fewer shots over time, just better burst DPS and easier thermal management. And this also comes at the cost of worse shield recharge and a worse boost frequency. Heat sinks don't just remove heat from your ship, they also provide 2 megawatts of weapons capacitor charge while active. How long are they active? 10 seconds apparently, so that's 20 megajoules for free, and for this reason, heat sinks are especially powerful for mitigating heat generated from firing your weapons. Pre-engineered heat sinks, which are pretty cheap and easy to get your hands on, are active for 17.5 seconds, providing 35 megajoules. For your small class hardpoints, a turreted multi-cannon generates just 0.4 units per shot, or 0.3 units per second overall. Completely negligible. For whatever reason, specifically Class 1 turreted multi-cannons are cracked in terms of thermal load and power draw, even compared to gimbaled and fixed Class 1 multis. I guess it's a bit of charity to noobs. A Class 1 gimbaled frag cannon is 0.44 units per shot, and a Class 1 railgun with feedback cascade has a thermal load of 7.2 per shot. You will only need to fire the frag cannon about once every 5 seconds, and the railgun is just a reaction to seeing shield cells, so its overall draw is limited. As for Class 1 beam lasers, assuming we're using gimbals in order to be able to actually use the lasers at the same time as your plasma shocks, in order to not mix fixed projectiles with fixed hit scans, the baseline long-range grade 5 thermal load is 3.65 units per second, times for 2 lasers, and assuming 100% time on target, that's 7.3 units per second of heat dissipation. In order for both thermal vent beam lasers to refund the thermal load of emptying all 3 of your plasma shocks, it will take about 14 seconds. However, for that 14 seconds, you will also be dedicating 4.22 megawatts of your weapon's capacitor recharge exclusively to venting that thermal load, a total energy cost of 59 megajoules. For reference, firing all 3 plasma shocks dry from full has a total capacitor energy cost of 55 megajoules. Remember that the highest achievable weapon's capacitor recharge rate is 6.48 megawatts, meaning that firing 2 thermal vent beam lasers will consume 66% of your possible charge, if you have 4 pips into weapons. That 4.22 megawatt capacitor charge could easily go into keeping your capacitor topped off, and therefore more thermally efficient per shot. With a volley cost of 55 megajoules of energy and a max recharge rate of 6.48 megawatts, you will notice that you cannot fully refund the cost of a plasma volley during its reload time. It takes almost 8.5 seconds, and the burst time with reload time factored in is about 6.5 seconds. But if you are also spending 4.22 megawatts of charge speed on beam lasers, then fully refunding a volley with all 4 pips into weapons will take 24 seconds instead of 8.5. Change the lasers to grade 5 efficient and you end up with a thermal vent rate of 2.92 units per second, and a distro draw of 2.32 megawatts per second. Efficient engineering reduces thermal load more than it reduces distro draw, making this a net negative trade-off. Change the engineering to overcharged and the distro draw is increased more than the thermal load, resulting in 8.4 units a second of thermal load, and a distro draw of 5.7 megawatts. The only way to increase thermal load without also increasing distro draw is short-range engineering. Legitimately, this is an option that the Kestrel can use, since it loves to get up close and personal. This will result in the thermal vent capacity of 10.22 units a second, and the base of 4.22 megawatts of distro draw. But the uptime will be pretty bad because its damage fall-off starts at 600 meters. That is way too close for normal engagement. You have to keep in mind that as your current heat decreases, so does your ship's passive thermal dissipation. So, while beam lasers will provide heat dissipation, you won't get the full value because it will actually start to fight your normal dissipation. This is also not mentioning the fact that gimbaled lasers have incredibly poor uptime if the enemy pops chaff, and will likely end up net positive for thermal load due to mostly shooting the sky. Because of Class 1 beam lasers' very high distro draw and surprisingly weak thermal load, I do not advise actually using them, as saving 4.22 megawatts of your distro's 6.48 megawatts of recharge to top up your capacitor, and getting more plasma shocks off at better thermal efficiency, will simply deal more damage and keep you cooler overall. In my experience, running thermal vents on a Kestrel is more likely to keep you from overheating due to simply reducing the amount of shots you were even capable of taking in the first place. Kinda like putting an engine governor on your hardpoints. Now, you may want to run thermal vent beam lasers, or TV beams as they like to call them, in order to do a stealth build. After all, if you can keep your thermal signature below 15%, you become virtually untargetable, Well, two bad pieces of news about that. 1. NPC pilots really do not give a shit if you are currently invisible. They are capable of utilizing fixed hardpoints as though they were gimbaled, even if they are incapable of acquiring a target lock. They are targeting computers strapped into a pilot's seat. They don't know that you are supposed to be invisible. This is also a problem with the dazzle shell, dispersal field, and target lock break experimental effects. They simply do not function in PvE. I believe this is supposed to prevent hull tanks from abusing silent running to just own zone anacondas in a has-res, but the result is that it's never safe to assume that an NPC cannot see you. The closest thing that you'll get to an over-the-horizon attack in this game is killing a gunship outright with your overwhelming DPS before it can physically turn around to fire on you. Naturally, this is a different story in AX combat. Thargoids will still know where you are, but their accuracy is pathetic if you can manage to keep your thermals low. 2. That 15% thermal capacity is, statistically, only 41 units of heat, which you will blow past in about 2 plasma shock bursts, less than a second of weapon fire. Try to keep your heat below that threshold and you will be dealing no damage, son. So, thermal vent beams. You can use them, but there really isn't a way that I can make the math make sense. You are much better served managing your ship's power plant thermal load, as that is active 100% of the time, and does not require distro draw. Which is a good segue to pivot to power plant thermal load. It's much less of a factor than many people assume it is, but it's still important. If I can drill one thing into your head in this video, let it be this. You should always use grade A power plants. This is true for every ship, even exploration. They are only 25% heavier than a D-rated power plant at the same class, when all other modules are 80% heavier than D-rated at the same class. A-rated power plants weigh half of what any other core internal module weighs at that class. Part of a power plant being A-rated is that it is optimized for weight. And D-rated power plants generate 0.75 units per megawatt of thermal load, when an A-rated generates 0.4. Almost half of the thermal load, all while having more integrity and power capacity. The only true downside to an A-rated power plant is that it is more expensive. Now, when approaching your Kestrel build, you will start with the power plant engineering and everything else will have to circle around it. Combat ships usually use overcharged thermal spread plants. A-rated overcharged plants still have less thermal load than an armored D-rated. The heat load is not that crazy. It's just more than it could be. But it's important to understand the scale we're working with here. So, option 1 is grade 5 overcharged thermal spread, with a power capacity of 28.56 megawatts and a heat efficiency of 0.45 units per megawatt. The maximum thermal load is 12.85, if you absolutely redline it, which I actually do. My overcharged build uses 99.2% of its capacity with its hardpoint deployed. I've managed to make a pretty damn good shield tank using an overcharged build, complete with shield cell banks. Factor in full thrust from a dirty tuned engine and the turreted multi-cannon's thermal load, and your total thermal load is 15.49, leaving 24.21 units per second of dissipation for firing your guns. Option 2 is grade 5 armored thermal spread. Armored power plants are an excellent choice for most builds. They get slightly better capacity and slightly better thermals, and a lot more integrity, which is always appreciated in a hull tank build. With a maximum capacity of 22.85 megawatts and a heat efficiency of 0.3168 units per megawatt, the maximum thermal load of this power plant is 7.24 units per second. This is less to do with the better thermal efficiency and more to do with the fact that we are just using less power. This armored power plant build will lean towards being a hull tank, but still has pretty decent shields. All factors added, the thermal overhead comes out to 9.82, leaving a headroom of just under 30 units per second of thermal dissipation for your guns. That's about a 25% improvement, and we sacrifice a third to half of our shield strength to accomplish it, while also dropping the shield cell banks. Option 3 is a low emissions plant. I've never been a fan of low emissions plants because they take such a hit to actual capacity that, unless you're running a highly specialized cold orbiter build in AX combat, you're never really going to be able to afford good defenses. This is what I would classify as a cursed build because we're going with, and I swear I never thought I'd say this, Grade 5 low emissions Monstered. Yes, Monstered, really. Monstered provides 5% more power, which reduces the power loss penalty from 15% to 10.8%. By the way, this is also the heaviest A-rated power plant you can fit to this ship. This build is so mortgaged for power that I can't even use A-rated life support. I am using 18.19 of the 18.21 power capacity. I find myself legitimately tempted to turn off my life support when my hardpoints deploy, just to get a slightly better shield. The upshot is that we can stuff the damn thing with hull and module reinforcements because they don't take any power, and the Kestrel's engines are surprisingly mass agnostic, so we don't lose any speed. For the effort, the low emissions plant's capacity is 18.21, and the efficiency is 0.14 units per megawatt, leading to an overall load of just 2.55 units per second. All factors added, the thermal load is 5.73, leaving a thermal overhead of just under 34 units per second of dissipation. A 10-ish% improvement over the Armoured build, and a 40% improvement over the Overcharged build. A total difference in thermal dissipation of 9.4 units per second, which is a better thermal optimization than firing 2 TV beams 100% of the time, unless they were short range. The Armoured build is probably the best of all worlds, but in practice, I find little to complain about the thermals of the Overcharged build, and properly piloted, the low emissions build has no issues with survivability. I'll provide build links in the description for all three. Just remember that hull tanks frequently suffer hardpoint malfunctions, which result in reduced DPS, and there really isn't any amount of module reinforcement you can use to mitigate that. But really, you don't need to overthink the thermals that much, just exercise some restraint. A few players balked at the fact that I ran an overcharged Corvette that has shield cells without a heatsink, and I've never really needed one, it just takes good capacitor management. Trigger discipline and pip juggling is what makes the difference between doing a decent amount of damage and being fine, and doing mathematically optimal DPS, but running so hot that Diamondbacks park up on your flank to fuel scoop. Also, a heatsink has almost the same passive power consumption as an E-rated Grade 5 heavy-duty supercap shield booster, which will increase your shield strength by 50% and only weighs 2 tons. Guess which one I'm choosing most days? On to the third heat source to factor in, your engines. All engines, regardless of size or class, generate 1.3 units per second at full thrust, even in supercruise. The only thing that can change this is engineering. For performance purposes, pretty much every build uses Grade 5 dirty-tuned drag drives. This increases the thermal load to 2.29 units per second, which is surprisingly modest, all things considered. Clean tuning thermal spread on your engines can get their thermals down to just 0.47 units per second, but they also draw 5% more power than even dirty-tuned engines, which can offset the thermal savings ever so slightly depending on engine class. They also draw this additional power when not undergoing thrust. Engines are by far the most power-hungry component of any build, so any increase to their power draw from engineering is substantial. It's not uncommon for engines alone to equate to 35 to 60% of your total power capacity. The only time I've ever seen a module above the thrusters on the power management menu is when I engineered AFMUs to Grade 4 shielded for kicks. By the way, unrelated to the Kestrel, but shielded AFMUs benefit from having the additional integrity granted by the shielded experimental effect, even when they are powered down. So, if an exploration build can afford to actually run them when they are powered up, it's actually not a bad idea, especially in builds that only have space for one AFMU, which will be incapable of repairing itself. Looking at you, Diamondback. But I digress. Strengthened engines also run colder, having a thermal load of 0.585 units per second, and do not have an increased power draw. but they are so hilariously slow, they pretty much never see use in the field. You're going to want dirty tuning for this one. The improved performance is worth the almost immeasurable savings in thermal load, and the comparatively smaller power draw is also essential. You may think to yourself, well, I don't really need to be a max speed build, maybe I do want better thermal performance. But unfortunately, your maximum speed is tied directly to your maneuverability. You cannot have highly maneuverable engines that are not also fast. In this case, we don't use dirty tuning because it allows us to go vroom, we want them because it allows us to turn on a dime. Now, boosting also generates a substantial amount of thermal load. How much? No idea, you tell me. It appears to be a flat amount though, at least as far as I can tell, slowly dumping in additional heat for the boost duration. I'm unsure if thermal load engineering radically affects this heat generation, but one thing I can say is that the capacitor cost of boosting is fixed per ship. It will cost 14 megajoules to boost in the Kestrel, doesn't matter what you do to it. Let's talk about shield engineering for a second, shall we? Honestly, I've learned more about shield engineering in the last month than I thought there was to even know. Bi-weave shields take less power than A-rated while being commensurately weaker, almost pound for pound actually. The difference is about 30% for both attributes. But they are also capable of regenerating shield health 120% faster, and the 30% energy saved on the shield generator itself can get you more points of health per megawatt spent if used on stronger shield boosters. For a ship that is this strained for power draw, this is essential. In the Kestrel's specific circumstance, the difference between bi-weave and A-rated is 1 megawatt. You can power 4 E-rated shield boosters for 1 megawatt, and that will equate to over a 200% raw shield strength boost. And all it cost you was 30% shield strength. This trick isn't always applicable. Not every ship is this starved for power, and you will also need the utility mounts to pull it off. To make the most of a bi-weave shield rather than focus on total strength before failing, optimize the amount of damage that each individual point of health absorbs, because this basically gives you additional leverage for your regen rate. Of course, you hit heavy diminishing returns around 65%, so you also need to invest a certain amount into raw strength. The faster recharge rate of a bi-weave does end up being a higher drain on your system's capacitor, and this is definitely a ship where you will want 3 or 4 pips into weapons. But there's a trick to it. You might be reluctant to use low draw for shields because they are statistically weaker, but that's in a white room. Not only can we move the power draw savings for better value to the shield boosters, low draw shields use fewer megajoules of systems capacitor energy per point of shield health. Especially on a ship like the Kestrel, where you will be putting all 4 pips into weapons and starving your system's capacitor, a low draw shield will perform better. Low draw is kinda weird like that. Your shield regen stat is slower than fast charge, but in practice is actually faster during combat. And this is especially important with a bi-weave shield that is made to optimize every individual point of shield health, and is especially distro thirsty. It also means that if your shield pops, which causes your distro draw to spike during rebuild, your system's capacitor is probably going to be full instead of empty, helping it rebuild faster without juggling pips. Low draw shields are especially important if you choose to opt for a weapon-focused distributor. A 5A charge-enhanced superconduit's power distro can provide 3.77 megawatts with 4 pips into systems. A 5A bi-weave with fast charge has a maximum distro draw of 3.88 megawatts when rebuilding the shield, meaning that without a buffer in the capacitor, it won't be able to rebuild at peak rate. The distro can only provide the power to regen at 6.3 HP per second rather than the sticker value of 6.47. A low draw shield's peak distro draw is 2.7 megawatts, and therefore can hit the max rebuild rate of 5.63 HP per second without exhausting reserves. The more salient point, however, is the rebuild rate when you have less pips into shields. At 1.5 pips into system's capacitor, you get 37.5% of your maximum possible recharge rate, which means the rebuild rate for fast charge is effectively 2.35 HP per second, and on low draw, it's 2.94 HP per second. In this circumstance, fast charge is operating below its active shield regeneration rate, so it will begin discharging capacitor charge to operate, while low charge is still above its regen rate and will keep the capacitor full. With just one pip granting 25% system's recharge rate, fast charge is 1.57 HP per second, and low draw is 1.98 HP per second. With only one system pip, both shields are now discharging the capacitor, but low draw is doing it more slowly and efficiently. 20% lower distro draw per point of shield health means a flat 20% better regen rate when the capacitor is being starved. It's just that simple. Pip juggling may be able to squeeze better performance out of fast charge, but you are so constantly draining your weapons capacitor in a Kestrel that it will probably end up costing you DPS to do so. And the bonus energy from using low draw also means you can afford better boosters. My god, I've been talking for an hour already. Getting into the builds themselves, I'm providing 3 builds, one for each power plant engineering. Which one is for you will depend on personal preference. The overcharge build is the most survivable, the armored build is something of a Goldilocks zone between DPS and survivability. And the low emissions build is DPS at all possible costs. And yes, I did build and playtest all 3 of these builds on different hulls. I have 3 Kestrels now. The engineering was a nightmare. Thank God for fleet carriers. All of these builds will not function without proper power priority settings. Remember to turn off your cargo hatch, set life support sensors and engines to priority 1, shields and shield boosters to 2, weapons and power distributors to 3, FSDs, FSD boosters and supercruise assists to 4. Note that these are all PvE builds, optimized for high shield resistances rather than raw shield HP. They will get blown out of the water against sources of absolute damage, such as another player using plasma shocks. This is kind of the reason why you may have heard that it's not a great PvP ship. This ship is also way too power restricted to use a good kill warrant scanner, I'm afraid. You could slip an E-rated fast scan scanner in there, but in all cases it will come at a hefty cost to shield integrity, and if you're planning to use a Kestrel for operations, forget about using a kill warrant scanner, it won't help you. Let's begin by covering the shared modules between all 3 builds. The bulkheads should be lightweight heavy-duty deep plating. These builds either rely heavily on shields for survivability, or can layer a ridiculous amount of hull reinforcements which provides better per-ton hull HP than higher class bulkheads. These builds all hover around the breakpoint where additional weight will start to cost you speed and maneuverability. And the 45 tons from using heavy-duty deep plating military-grade composites or reactive surface composites will push you below having literally optimal speed and handling. It can actually account for more than 10% of your total vessel weight. Hardpoints are, of course, 3 plasma shocks, 2 frag cannons, one with corrosive shell at grade 5 high capacity, one with drag munitions at grade 3 high capacity. This evens out the ammo capacity for both guns and saves a precious bit of power. If you wish to swap out one or both for a long-range thermal vent beam laser, the power draw and mass is almost identical, so you can consider them interchangeable. I still do not recommend TV beams from a mathematical standpoint, but you are presumably an adult and capable of making your own decisions. For the FSD, you'll want a pre-eng and then use Mass Manager. The rule of thumb is deep charge on FSD class 4 and below, Mass Manager 5 and above, although in this circumstance we're dancing on the razor's edge of comparable results. Mass Manager has like 4% more effective range, deep charge has like 2% more per jump range. Use either, it's better than using neither. Or just don't bother. This is a combat ship, you are probably jumping it into the action using a fleet carrier, or teleporting it into an operation. Notably, your FSD's power draw does not need to be factored in for your power capacity, as it can be set to power down when your hardpoints deploy. Also, pre-eng FSDs have a faster boot up time, which means that you may be able to make a quicker escape after it's been powered down using this feature. You will want Mark II Agile Boost Thrusters, say it with me, dirty-tuned drag drives. These allow for a positively insane amount of maneuverability during boost turns. It's actually kind of game-breaking. Veteran pilots are used to needing to use flight assist off during turns to turn as fast as possible. The Kestrel doesn't even need it. And in fact, if you try to do this, you will likely oversteer so hard you will no longer know which direction you are facing when you finally stop. A-rated sensors engineered to long range will still only weigh 5 tons and will have a typical emissions range just shy of 1100 meters. I still miss the 13K typical range from my federal Corvette, but weighing 5 tons instead of 320 is a bargain. You want good sensors on a combat ship. It lets you track down juicy targets much more easily, and theoretically makes target lock break from popping a heatsink more difficult. The power distro is 5A charge-enhanced superconduits. This is pretty much the gold standard for every combat ship that isn't a Thargoid Instagib build. You can opt for a weapon-focused. With guns this thirsty, it's far from a bad idea. However, it will reduce your boost frequency and cause your shields to rebuild more slowly. On top of which, if you do the math, weapon-focused provides your guns less power over time. It's just better for short bursts of damage all at once, which admittedly is what the Kestrel is all about. The good news is that all 3 builds are compatible with both options since it doesn't alter the power draw or weight. Finally, you can put a Super Cruise Assist into the Class 1 slot since it doesn't have to be considered for power draw or weight. It's useful for using the Super Cruise Assist trick. No docking computer this time. If you can't get a Kestrel through a mail slot and land it, there is genuinely no helping you. Now to get into the specifics of each build. The overcharged build is a dedicated shield tank, grade 5 overcharged power plant with thermal spread, A-rated life support, lightweight engineering to taste. If you wish, you can change out the frag cannons for a high-capacity feedback cascade railgun and/or turreted high-capacity corrosive shell multi-cannon. Only the overcharged build can afford the railgun, and the multi-cannon is a little too trigger-happy for my liking and therefore runs dry a lot faster than the frag cannons. Just some options to consider. The utility mounts will be 4 A-rated boosters, 2 heavy-duty super cap, 2 resistance augmented force block. The shield is a Class 5 Biweave Grade 5 thermal resistant fast charge. This one uses fast charge because it has the power overhead, and its highly reinforced shields take much longer to rebuild compared to the other 2 builds, which both use low draw. Basically, you'll want to juggle pips to systems between fights, and you may still need to wait around for a minute. This is complemented by 2 4A shield cell banks specialized boss cells. You will not be able to have both powered up at the same time, and since they take 17 seconds to boot up from being powered down, I'd recommend not trying to hot swap them during a firefight. Shield cells are intentionally designed to have such long boot up times so that you don't just retract your hardpoints and pop them like candy with the freed up power. A Class 3 Guardian FSD booster. This is the most useful thing that I could afford for the weight and in-combat power draw. All 3 Class 2 slots are occupied by 2D Guardian shield reinforcement packages. If you don't have these unlocked yet, your shields will pop faster, but they will also rebuild faster. Raw shield reinforcement is a double-edged sword like that. Stronger raw shields take longer for your generator to get back to 50%, which makes you vulnerable for longer, but the plan is for them to never pop in the first place. If you don't want to deal with the shield reinforcements or the shield cell banks, then the armored or low emissions builds are for you. On to the armored build. The armored build strikes a balance between survivability and dakka. A grade 5 armored power plant with thermal spread. This also uses A-rated life support and also has 4 A-rated shield boosters with almost the same configuration. 2 heavy-duty super cap, 2 resistance augmented flow control. Yes, flow control. We're using 99.1% of our power capacity. The shield generator is also a Class 5 Biweave thermal resistant, but this one is low draw. A Class 4 FSD booster, but if you like you can replace it with an additional hull reinforcement. That will add 10 tons to your build, making it ever so slightly slower than optimal. The military-locked Class 4 slot, as well as the Class 3 and 2 of the Class 2 slots, are filled with heavy-duty hull reinforcements, followed by 2 Class 2 module reinforcements. Finally, we have the low emissions build, heavily compromised for defenses in order to fit a criminally underpowered power plant. This runs as cold as can be reasonably expected, while still being a ship that can survive a firefight. The power plant is grade 5 low emissions with the monstered experimental effect. It could run almost immeasurably colder, but you'd be surprised how much I can milk out of that additional 900 kilowatts. This build has to downgrade its life support to D-rated to shave power. My apologies. The utility mounts are 2 E-rated shield boosters, resistance augmented supercap, 1 E-rated heavy-duty supercap, and 1 D-rated heavy-duty supercap. Yeah, D-rated, that's how granular we're getting here. Since you're already interested in weaker shields in the pursuit of faster kills and more efficiency, you may want to swap out one of the E-rated resistance augmented boosters for an E-rated fast scan engineered kill warrant scanner. This comes at the cost of 400 to 700 HP of shield to each element. The effective range is 1500 meters, but the scan time is only 2 seconds. And the Kestrel really does not have difficulty staying up close and personal. This build also utilizes a Class 5 bi-weave, thermal resistant low draw, and fills all remaining slots except the Class 1 with heavy-duty deep plating hull reinforcements and 2 module reinforcements. With shields this weak, you will probably need to take some knocks and shrug them off. In this circumstance, our shield boosters are lighter, so we can afford the additional hull weight. The build is almost pound for pound exactly at the maximum speed and handling breakpoint, and its power draw in combat is a staggering 18.19 of a maximum possible 18.21. 99.9% power utilization. I have taken every inch that this ship can give me. If you really want to push the envelope and have a passive thermal load of 2.18 instead of 2.55, there are options for that, but my god, you will never notice the difference. Statistically, it would take 4.5 seconds for that optimization to equate to a single additional shot from your plasma shocks. Swap the monstered experimental effect on the power plant, downgrade your sensors to D-rated, and change out the D-rated booster to E-rated, and congratulations. You are now at 100% power utilization, and you realistically haven't lost that much in terms of shield strength. The downside is that your typical emissions range is now just 8 kilometers instead of 11. I've used this build. The increased difficulty in finding targets is not worth it. So yeah, bow down to your new god. If you need definitive proof of just how busted this ship actually is, hop into any ship-only combat operation like Terminal Prosecution Hard, and you'll very quickly notice that elite Kestrel NPCs are always the last enemy standing each wave. They're so small and fast that it can take 4 experienced pilots a solid minute to DPS them down. Also, with a few more weeks of experience with operations on me than when I did the voice work for the earlier parts of this video, I can say that operations demand a different kind of build than anything prior. Ammo is less of a concern because you are hopefully not going to be in sustained combat for more than 20 minutes. Kestrels aren't the best for specifically high difficulty operations. Fully loaded heavy class ships or Python Mark II gunboats with entirely too many overcharged frag cannons seem to do better. But if all you want to do is chill in a Haz-Res for literally hours, either for fun, merits, or community goal points, the Kestrel is the first and final option. For the moment, who knows what lies on the horizon? All we do know is that it will be more powerful.